My father pointed at me across a room full of 40 relatives and told me I was grounded. I was 36 years old, and the house he was standing in hadn't belonged to him for 7 years. That's where we're going tonight. But stay with me, because the moment that will truly stop you isn't the look on my father's face when the truth finally landed, it's the 7 years before it. The 7 years I spent carrying a secret so heavy it had worn smooth grooves into my palm, protecting a man who spent those same years finding new ways to remind me I was nothing. I've been sitting with this story for a long time. I didn't know if I was ready to tell it. But I keep finding people who are holding the same kind of silence. People who are carrying someone else's entire world on their back, while that person looks right through them and calls it love. If that's you tonight, this one is for you. My name is Miriam Calder, and this is what happened when I finally stopped holding the door. I work in commercial property asset management out of Nashville. I've been doing it since I was 22, starting as the assistant who made the coffee, and learned to read a lease addendum faster than anyone else in the room. Numbers are honest. A closing date is a closing date. A recorded deed is a recorded deed. I learned early to trust what is written down more than what people say out loud, and I had very specific reasons for that, reasons we'll get to. There is one key on my ring I have never explained to anyone. Brass, warm, worn, smooth from years of handling. I have carried it for 7 years and kept it turned inward, pressed against my palm, where no one could read what it was. That key opens the front door of the house on Sycamore Drive, where my parents have lived for 30 years. The house with my grandfather's name carved into a granite block beside the front porch. The house my father described as his family's greatest achievement at every gathering, every holiday, every toast I could remember. The house that, as of 7 years ago, belongs entirely to my company. He just didn't know that yet. My mother called on a Wednesday. She always calls when she needs me to do something, leads with information I already have, and gets to the real ask in the final sentence. Your father's 40th anniversary is the 22nd, she said, as though I might have written something else in that slot. The whole family's coming. Cousins, aunts, the McGregors. Then, quieter. Miriam, please just let things go this year. Don't get him started. I said I'd be there. I said I'd behave. I meant it too. I had no plan to ruin anything. I had no plan at all. Not yet. But I want to tell you something that happened before the party. Something I'd been carrying for 7 years. Because you cannot understand that anniversary dinner without understanding the morning I stood in a dark hallway and listened to my family lay out a plan I was never supposed to know existed. Let me first tell you what the brass key opens. You've earned it. And my father never did. 7 years ago, the house on Sycamore Drive was 15 days from a foreclosure auction. My father had borrowed against it twice, once to fund a franchise expansion I had begged him not to make, and once to cover the bleeding when it failed. He stopped opening the mail when the notices started coming. My mother called me at 11:30 at night, whispering so he wouldn't hear, telling me there was a notice taped to the front door and asking me what it meant. I knew exactly what it meant. I was 29. I had savings, clean credit, and 3 lender relationships I had spent years carefully building. So I solved it. I bought the house through my company, Ironwood Property Group. Pre-foreclosure sale, fully negotiated, the bank signed off. Every dollar of the balance and the arrears and the fees paid outright. The deed was recorded in the company's name. My parents signed the closing documents that Harold Pruitt, who has been the family's lawyer for 20 years and quietly my lawyer for 7, set in front of them without fully reading them. They were too far underwater, and too relieved to ask the right questions. I told them an investor had stepped in and they could stay. No rent. No timeline. Indefinitely. I never told them the investor was me. I thought about it for a long time. I almost said it. But I understood the math. I understood that every morning my father walked into his own kitchen, he would see the thing he owed me, and that debt would not come back as gratitude. It would come back as contempt. Because that is how shame works in certain kinds of men. You do not hold it, you redirect it. You look at the person who saved you, and find new reasons to shrink them, because being small in front of your rescuer is its own unbearable thing. So I let him keep his story. He told himself he had worked something out with the bank. He told relatives he had weathered a rough patch the way a man does. Last spring, he had the family name recut into a fresh granite block by the front porch because the old one had weathered, and he could not stand a fading name. $400. A name should be permanent, he said. He had no idea the name on the paper had never been his at all. I told myself my silence was a gift. It took one Tuesday morning in October to understand it had also been a leash and I was the one holding the other end. My brother Jackson called me 2 weeks before the party. I knew within 10 seconds it was not a social call. Jack opens everything sideways, leads with flattery. waits for you to soften, then circles toward the real ask. His motorcycle franchise off Gallatin Pike had been almost turning the corner for 3 straight years. He needed a co-signer, someone with clean credit and real assets to stand behind a refinancing line. $160,000. He did not say my name directly. He did not have to. And in the background, half muffled, I could hear my father's voice, big and pleased with itself, holding court about the house. 3 generations, his grandfather's land, his father's foundation. He says it the way other families say grace. Jackson let something slip before we said goodbye. Just a few words, casual, trailing off. Dad's finally handling the house situation. The house situation. I stayed with that phrase after we hung up. My father did not have a house situation. He had a house he believed was his to do anything he wanted with. There was only one thing I could imagine him planning to do, and only one reason Jackson would want him to do it fast. I texted Harold Pruitt that week. He replied that we should talk before the party, that it might be sooner than I'd want. I said I'd call him after the weekend. I should have called him that hour. Instead, I drove to Sycamore Drive the morning of the anniversary, still telling myself I could keep this quiet. I came early to help my mother set up. The house was still dark and cool at 6:30 when I came down for coffee. I thought the house was still asleep. It wasn't. The coffee maker was already running. Low voices were coming from the dining room, the careful, hushed, kind people use when they believe no one is awake to hear them. My father, my mother, Jackson. I stopped in the hallway with an empty mug in my hand, and I listened. I want to be precise about what this was, because it matters. I did not creep forward. I did not press myself against the wall. I simply stood still in my own family's hallway, which was, technically, my hallway, and I heard what was said. What I heard in the next 90 seconds did not just make me angry. It rearranged something in me. It took the part of myself that had spent 7 years quietly hoping that if I just gave enough, and stayed long enough, and said little enough, I would eventually be loved correctly, and it set that part down, gently. The way you set down a glass when you decide you are done with what was in it. My father was speaking with the satisfaction of a man who has already thought something through and liked where it landed. Once the house was in Jackson's name, he said, they would pull a home equity line against it. $650 in appraised value. Pull $150. Cover the franchise refinancing and Kendall's venue deposit. Jackson's fiancé had already committed to a space her mother had chosen. My mother, quieter than the others, said my name once. Just my name, with a question mark behind it. And my father answered, slow and settled and satisfied. She'll apologize to her brother first, then she'll come around. She acts hard, but she folds. She just needs reminding that she's not the one who matters here. Never has been. Nobody argued. My mother did not argue. She just said, don't make a scene at the party, Raymond. And my father said he would make exactly the scene he wanted in his own house. His house. They were going to give my house to my brother, pull $150,000 out of it for a failing business and a venue Kendall's mother had approved, and then parade me in front of the family until I was soft enough to guarantee the loan that would put my own property at risk. The arithmetic of it was almost elegant. Every piece depended on me being exactly who they had trained me to be for 36 years. Quiet, useful, ashamed, and grateful for whatever they chose to give. I set my mug on the hall table without a sound. I did not feel like crying. I did not feel like screaming. I felt the way I feel when I finally locate the buried clause in a contract, the one the other side was hoping I would not read. I had found it. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my old bed, on the quilt my mother stitched the year I left for college, and I made one decision that unraveled 20 years of habit. I was not going to save them this time. Not from the consequences they had spent 7 years earning. I texted Harold, if he announces the house tonight, I want the truth in that room tomorrow morning. Have everything ready. 3 dots. Then. Are you certain? This cannot be walked back. I looked at the quilt and the brass key in my palm. I'm certain, I wrote. Then I packed. Quietly and methodically, the way I do everything, folded my spare clothes, zipped them into my bag, took my few books off the shelf, stripped the bed and folded the quilt into a neat square at the foot of the mattress, because I wanted the room to send a message that required no words. Not angry. Not destroyed. Just empty. Then I washed my face, put on my blazer, and went down to be a guest at my father's party. If you have ever walked into a room full of people who love someone who has spent years quietly diminishing you and had to smile, and eat, and nod while that person holds court, then you know exactly what the next few hours felt like. I have never found the right word for it. The closest I can come is this. It feels like watching a film about your own life in a language you are the only one in the room who can read. The house was beautiful, 40 years of marriage, 30 relatives, rented chairs on the back patio, maples going gold along the front walk. My father in his dark blazer accepting champagne and congratulations like a man receiving what was always owed to him. Jackson's fiancée Kendall stood in the front hall with her phone raised, narrating to her followers. "And this," she said, sweeping the camera up the staircase, "is going to be our forever home." She noticed me watching, smiled with every tooth she owned. At dinner, my father aimed early. He always does. "Miriam, you still managing other people's buildings? Or did you finally build something of your own?" A couple of cousins laughed, right on cue. My mother's hand went still on her napkin. The version of me who had promised her mother I'd be good tonight would have let it roll off. But I had spent that morning in the hallway. "I manage buildings, Dad," I said. "Easy and level. Jackson borrows against them. It's a different job." The table went quiet for half a second too long. My father's face did the slow red climb from the collar. I had watched it make that climb 100 times, but he laughed it short and turned to my uncle and changed the channel entirely. Across the table, my mother mouthed 2 words at me. I gave her a small nod. "I love her in the complicated way you love someone who taught you to make yourself smaller." Later, Jackson pulled me into the kitchen between dinner and the guests, scraping plates he had no intention of washing. The cosign ask came low and practiced. "It's a formality, Mir. The signature just sits there. You wouldn't pay a dime." I have heard that sentence in over a dozen deals. It has never once been true. A signature that just sits there is a signature that owns you the day everything goes sideways. "No," I said, not unkind. "Just done." He put a plate down harder than he meant to. "Dad said you'd be like this." He turned, and there was something rehearsed in it. He said, "You'll come around once you learn to apologize to me." Learn to apologize. The family's favorite verb. I asked what exactly I was supposed to apologize for. Jackson couldn't answer it. He never can. Because the apology was never about a specific wrong. It was about posture. They wanted me bent. Harold Pruitt arrived at 8 in a gray suit with a small leather folio. He found me near the back doors and tilted his head toward the porch. We stepped into the cold. He told me where things stood. The deed clean and recorded. Ironwood Property Group as sole owner. 7 years on record. My parents legally occupants at the sufferance of the owner. He had a termination notice in the folio, unsigned. He had a certified copy of the deed. "If your father stands up tonight and promises this house in front of 30 people," Harold said quietly, "he is making a false representation on camera, in front of witnesses." He looked at me. "But do not correct him here. Not tonight. A speech is just words. Words we can absorb. The moment he tries to make it real, sign something, file something, actually move that deed, we move the same hour, quietly, in writing, on our terms." He looked back at the lit windows. "A man digging a hole works faster when no one tries to take the shovel from him." Then he went inside to find a drink he was not going to finish. My father gave his speech at 9. I'll give him this, he was good at it. Warm and funny, getting the ants misty, thanking my mother for 40 years of tolerance toward a stubborn man. The room laughed and she pressed a knuckle to her eye and everyone softened. Then his voice shifted into the gravel he keeps for important pronouncements, and he rested one hand on the back of a chair like a man bracing himself for history. "This house," he said, "is 3 generations of this family. My grandfather's land. My father's foundation. My roof." He let that sit. "When the time comes, this house goes to Jackson. Because Jackson is the one who understands what a legacy means." Applause. Glasses raised. Kendall had her phone above her head, filming the whole thing. Jackson flushed with a pleasure so unguarded it was almost painful to look at. My mother studied the floor. I stood at the edge of the room with my untouched wine and did nothing. Exactly what Harold had told me. I let my father stand in my house and make the biggest promise of his life, on camera, in front of every person who mattered to him. And I waited. It was Jackson who turned the speech into a scene, the way he turns everything into a scene eventually. He had had a few too many, and the applause had unwound him, and on his way to refill he stopped near me and decided to perform. "And here she is," he announced, loud enough to pull every nearby head our way. "My big sister. Manages buildings for a living. Can't manage to keep a man or a good mood." A few people laughed, the soft, uncertain kind that comes from not knowing what else to do when the favorite makes a joke. He grinned, encouraged. "Dad's leaving her the garden shed." More laughter. He was waiting for me to flush, to go quiet, to absorb it the way I had absorbed it for 30 years. I set my wine glass down on the side table. "I do manage buildings, Jackson," I said, and I kept my voice pleasant and clear. No edge for anyone to catch. That's probably why I can tell the difference between owning one and borrowing against one. The laughter stopped. Jackson blinked. What does that mean? It means $160,000 of refinancing doesn't sign itself, I said. And it means you should be careful about what people promise you in front of a crowd. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even loud. It was just true. And true in that room landed like a dropped plate. Across the room, my father set his glass down hard enough to ring and came toward me through the crowd. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that the nearest relatives went quiet to watch, and he did the thing that still comes back to me at unexpected moments. He raised one finger, pointed. One finger, like I was 9 years old and had tracked something across a clean floor. His voice came out loud enough to reach the back of the room. You don't get to talk to your brother that way. Not in my house. I said nothing. You think you're better than this family? You think those little digs are clever? Still nothing. And then, pulling from somewhere deep in the language of my childhood, he said it. You are grounded until you apologize to your brother. For a moment, the room did not know what to do with it. A 36-year-old woman, in heels, being grounded by her father at his anniversary party. Then one person laughed a single bark, and it gave everyone permission, and the laughter spread warm and loose across the room, and Kendall's phone was up, and Jackson was smirking, and my mother was staring so hard at the floor it seemed like she might go through it. My face went hot. Every degree of it. 30 relatives, the grandfather clock ticking, 7 years of silence, all of it pressing in at once. And I want to be honest with you here because this is the part people always gloss over in stories like this. That moment nearly broke something in me. Not broke me, but cracked something. Because there is a specific kind of humiliation designed for the person who has given the most, one that finds the gap between what you have actually done and what they have chosen to believe about you, and drives a wedge in. It works because some part of you still wants to be seen. Some small, persistent, irrational part still believes that if you just stay calm enough, they will eventually look at you and recognize what you are. That part goes very quiet in the laughter. I looked at my father. I felt the brass key in my pocket, warm against my hand, and I said the only word the moment deserved. All right. Just that. Nothing more. He thought it meant I had surrendered. He smiled the smile of a man who has just been reminded he was always right about everything. He had no idea that all right was the sound of me setting down 7 years of weight, turning around, and walking up the stairs of a house that had been mine the entire time. Upstairs, I finished what I had started that morning. The room was already mostly empty, the bed already stripped. I zipped my bag, looked around at the desk, the bare shelves, the faded rectangle on the wall where a poster used to hang. I felt, against everything I expected to feel, light. I took the guest key, the one my parents kept for me on the kitchen hook, and set it on the nightstand. The brass key, the owner's key, I put back in my pocket and let it settle warm against my hip. Then I texted Harold one line. He announced it. On camera. Send it in the morning. In person. 3 dots. Then his reply. I'll be there at 9. I carried my bag down the back stairs, out to my car, and drove home. I slept better than I had in years. My father called Harold at 8 the next morning, riding high on the party, ready to make the legacy official. Drop the papers, he said. I want the house in Jackson's name, today if you can manage it. Harold went quiet on the line. My father took the silence for hesitation and drove through it. It's not complicated. It's my house. I just want my son's name on it. And Harold Pruitt, who had been the careful man for 30 years, who I had never once heard raise his voice, said 6 words and ended the call. Raymond? Don't sign anything. I'm coming. No explanation. No softening. He grabbed the folio off his desk, got in his car, and drove out to Sycamore Drive faster than a careful man should drive. I arrived at 8:30. I let myself in through the back. I had every right, though I had never once done it, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I helped myself to. My father came down the stairs, saw me sitting there in my coat, and looked genuinely pleased, which told me everything about how the night had landed for him. To Raymond Calder I had come back the way I always came back, softened, ready to apologize, ready to be useful. He poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter, and looked at me with the slow, satisfied smile of a man whose opinion of himself has just been confirmed by the universe. Well, he said, look who came home. I didn't answer. My mother stood very still by the sink. Finally learned your place, he said. There it was, the bookend. He said it lightly, almost fondly, like it was just a bit of family teasing and I was the one with the problem if it landed. I set my mug down on the table, slow and deliberate, and I looked at him. I had a whole answer. I had been holding it since dawn. But Harold had told me to let my father finish digging. And my father wasn't quite done. So I let the silence stretch. My father, who cannot stand a silence he did not create, frowned and pushed off the counter and decided to go confirm that his point had landed upstairs. I heard his footsteps cross the hall. Heavy and certain, still riding last night. I heard the door of my old room open. Then I heard the certainty go out of his walk. He came back down slower than he had gone up. He stood in the kitchen doorway holding the guest key I'd left on the nightstand, turning it over and over in his fingers, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. Not theatrical confusion, not anger building toward a performance. Genuine confusion. The kind a man has when he opens a door and the room behind it does not match the floor plan he has memorized for 30 years. Why is your room empty? I moved my things, I said. When? Last night. He stared at me, working to fit the empty room into the story where I had surrendered and returned and everything was back the way it should be. The pieces would not go. You don't just leave, he said, his voice starting to climb. This is a family. You don't pack up and sneak out in the middle of the night like a tenant skipping rent. The word hung there, tenant. He had reached for an insult and grabbed, without knowing it, the precise legal term for what he was. My mother made a small sound. Then the doorbell rang. Then it rang again. Fast. Twice more the ring of a man who cannot wait for the door to be answered. My father went, because he always answers his own door. He opened it, and Harold Pruitt stood on the step in his gray suit, folio clasped against his chest, face pale. A few relatives who had stayed overnight were drifting into the kitchen for coffee just as Harold came through the front door, so the room filled quickly. Jackson appeared at the top of the stairs in yesterday's clothes. Kendall was behind him, phone in hand, not filming, just holding it, watching. My mother pressed both hands flat against the counter behind her like she needed it to stand. Harold did not take his coat off, did not shake anyone's hand. He stood in the front hallway under the grandfather clock. The one my father claimed his grandfather had carried down from Knoxville, though I had stood beside my mother at an estate sale in Murfreesboro 12 years ago, and watched her talk the seller down to $550 for it, and when Harold spoke, his voice was shaking. This careful man, 30 years of steady, and his voice was shaking. Raymond, he said, what have you done? My father's face went from confusion to red in under a second. What have I done? I called you an hour ago. I told you to put the house in Jackson's name. That is all. What is the matter with you? Harold looked at him steadily. Then he looked past him, past my father's shoulder, directly at me sitting at the table. A question in his eyes. I gave the smallest nod. What's the matter with me? Harold said quietly. Is that last night you promised this house to your son in front of 30 people, and this morning you ordered me to make it official in writing. I held my tongue at your party, Raymond. I am not going to stand here and help you give away something that isn't yours to give. He opened the folio. He drew out a single certified document, heavy paper, county seal, the kind of paper that does not care how loud you are or how proud, and he laid it flat on the dining room table. On the exact table where my father had carved me up at 100 family dinners. He smoothed it once with his palm. Raymond, he said, and his voice was gentle now. Anger gone, only truth left. You cannot give this house to your son. It is not yours. It has not been yours for 7 years. For a moment, nobody breathed. My father looked at the document on the table, looked at Harold, looked around at the relatives who had wandered in for coffee and found themselves inside something else entirely. What is this? He said. And then again, louder. What is this? Harold put one finger on the seal. This is the recorded deed to this property. The owner of record is Ironwood Property Group, LLC. A pause that filled the entire room. The sole member of that company, he said, is your daughter Miriam. The kitchen made a sound. A collective, involuntary intake. My uncle's low, single syllable. Kendall's hand came up slowly to her mouth. Jackson came down 2 more stairs and stopped. And my father, because real life does not give you the villain who crumbles gracefully, reached for the weapon he had always used. Volume. That's a lie, he said. Then louder. That's a forgery. That's what did you do, Miriam? What did you set up with him? He was pointing at the document now, stabbing his finger at it like he could puncture it with enough force. You own my house? You expect me to stand here and accept that my own daughter? He stopped. And I watched him stop. Because somewhere in the sentence, the logic caught him. And there was no ending that helped him. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I kept my hands around the coffee mug and kept my tone exactly as low as it needed to be. The tone I use when the deal is already won and everyone just needs the paperwork to catch up. You didn't lose this house 7 years ago, Dad, I said. It was 15 days from a foreclosure auction. Mom called me at midnight. You had stopped opening the mail. The kitchen was perfectly still. I bought the house before it ever went to the bank. I paid every dollar it was owed, the balance, the arrears, all the fees. The deed was recorded in the company's name. And then I told you an investor had stepped in and you could stay. I looked at him, because I thought if I kept that one thing from you, you would never have to know how close it came. You would keep your story. You would keep your name on the door. You would never have to look at me across the table and know that I was the reason you still had a table. I let that sit. I bought your house, so you would never have to feel what you just felt. You're welcome. He moved through the full catalog of a cornered man in about 90 seconds, and I had predicted every stage. First the denial, forgeries, tricks, conspiracies, until Harold quietly noted that county records are publicly searchable on a phone. Then, the pivot to attack. I had planned this. I had waited for the anniversary. I had orchestrated the whole scene for an audience, which was almost funny, coming from the man who had planned a public grounding to soften me up for a loan guarantee. I let it pass. Then the self-pity arrived, which was the stage I had been watching for my whole life, the volume dropping, the voice cracking, the sentence beginning. After everything I did for you, he said it. Real or performed honestly, I could not tell anymore. I gave you a home. I gave you a name. And this is what my daughter does. By the counter, my mother finally spoke. She had been silent through all of it, the speech the night before, the grounding, the laughter, this morning's unraveling. Now she looked at me, and her eyes were wet, and she said very quietly, "Miriam, I always knew it was you. I always knew." For 1 second, the room tilted toward something that might have been Grace. Then she put her hand on my father's arm and said, "Raymond, sit down before you make yourself sick." And she chose him. The way she had chosen him for 40 years. The second passed. My father sat down heavily in his chair. And I finally stood. I answered the question he had asked me an hour before. "You asked if I'd finally learned my place," I said. "I have. It's on the deed." Here is the part people always expect to be the sweetest. And it wasn't. And I'm glad it wasn't. They expect me to stand in the doorway of my own house and tell my father to get off my property to finally feel the lever in my own hand and pull it. I thought about it. 1 warm, ugly second. I will not pretend otherwise. But I did not drive back to Sycamore Drive that morning to take a house. I drove there to stop being the family's emergency fund, its silent guarantor, its favorite target at the dinner table. And you do not accomplish that by becoming what you spent your whole life refusing to be. You accomplish it with terms. I had Harold lay it out plainly, the way I would lay out any deal. "You can stay," I said. "I am not putting my parents on the street, but it becomes a real arrangement. Option 1. A written month-to-month lease with Ironwood at a fair monthly number, well below market because I am your daughter and not a stranger. But it is in writing, because we are adults. Option 2. If you want this house to truly be yours, you purchase it from me at appraised value. Jackson can co-sign that loan if he is so committed to the family legacy." Jackson found his shoes very interesting at that point. "One condition either way," I said, and I let it land in the silence before continuing. "The lease runs month to month. No one at this table gets grounded, mocked, or made small again. Not me, not anyone. The next time it happens, I give the legal notice. On schedule. And the offer to buy closes with it." Harold set the unsigned notice on the table next to the deed so they understood it was real and ready. "I'm not taking your home," I told my father, who would not look at me. "I'm taking my name off the list of people you get to use for free." Then I picked up my coffee, finished it, found my keys, and walked out the front door alone. Nobody followed me. Which was its own kind of answer, and one I found I did not mind. On my way out, I stopped at the granite block beside the front porch. The family name, the founding year, recut last spring for $400 because a name should be permanent. I stood in the cold morning light and looked at it for a long moment. I could have had it removed. Technically, every brick it was set into and every beam behind it belonged to me. I left it where it was, because the name on the stone was never the thing that mattered. Anyone can carve a name in stone. The only question, the only one that has ever mattered, is whose name is on the paper. And now everyone in that house knew the answer. They took the lease. Of course they did. It was the most honest arrangement any of us had ever made, and the kindest deal I had to offer. My parents signed a month-to-month lease with Ironwood Property Group at a fair number, well under market, and for the first time in 7 years, the truth of the situation matched the paperwork. The home equity plan died the moment it met reality. You cannot borrow against a property you do not own. Jackson's franchise closed before spring. The Golden Son, as it turned out, only shines as long as someone is holding the light for him. When I stopped, he dimmed fast. Kendall deleted every piece of Forever Home content from her accounts. I checked. All of it gone. The relatives sorted themselves the way relatives always do, a few quietly proud of me, a few certain I had done something unforgivable to a sweet old man, most simply relieved it had not happened at their party. My mother began calling me, not to manage me, not to ask me to keep the temperature down, but just to talk carefully, the way someone does when they are learning a language late in life. I still have the brass key. It is on my ring with all the others now, turned outward, not pressed against my palm anymore, not hidden. It does not feel like a secret. It feels like what it always was, and what I never once let it be. Simply a door I am allowed to open on a house I chose to save, for reasons that were always mine, and never required anyone's permission or thanks. I go back to Sycamore Drive now and then. I knock. I sit at the table where I used to be the evening's entertainment. Nobody reaches for a joke at my expense anymore, because they all understand, at some level, that the person who owns the roof you are sitting under has options. My father and I don't talk much, but the last time I left, he walked me to the door past the granite block with his name cut into it, and he stopped and worked his jaw for a moment, struggling with something, and he got out 2 words. Words I do not believe he had ever said to me. Thank you. Looking at the step. Short and clumsy, and nowhere near enough. I took it anyway, because some men can only carry one heavy word at a time. That was his. People always ask me the same question after I tell this story. If you could go back, would you still do it? Would you still buy that house and say nothing? I've sat with that question a long time, and my honest answer is yes. I would still buy it. I would still keep my name off the paperwork. I would still let my father keep his version of events, because at 29 years old, that was the only way I knew how to love someone I didn't know how to reach. But there is one thing I would do differently. I would not let that silence become an unsigned contract. The most dangerous kind. No terms, no expiration date, no signatures. The kind where one person believes they are receiving a gift, and the other is quietly, slowly, handing over pieces of themselves they will never get back. Because that is the real danger in this story. Not my father, not my brother, not even the anniversary party or the deed or the lawyer on the doorstep. The real danger was the distance between giving because you love someone, and giving because some part of you believes that if you stop, you won't have a reason to stay. I spent 7 years not knowing the difference. And by the time I did, I had built an entire architecture of silence around a family that had learned to live inside it like it was just the walls of the house. The brass key I carried for 7 years, the one I kept pressed into my palm, hidden, never explained, I still have it, but I don't hide it anymore. I wear it on the outside of the ring now, facing out. Not as a trophy, not as proof. Simply because I no longer need to protect anyone from what it means. For the first time, the thing I am holding and the thing I am allowed to hold are the same thing. That is the only victory that actually lasted. I want to ask you something real before we're done. Not a poll, not a comment prompt, just a genuine question I want you to sit with tonight. Is there something you have been carrying in silence that started as love, and somewhere along the way became a habit you were too tired to examine? Not a secret necessarily, maybe just a version of yourself you scaled back so someone else could feel bigger. Maybe a boundary you never drew because you told yourself it wasn't worth the fight. Maybe a door you kept unlocking for people who never once asked who held the key. If something just came to mind, you don't have to say it out loud. But I want you to know that I wrote this story for that exact moment. The moment you recognize something in someone else's telling that you haven't been ready to name in your own. If this landed somewhere real for you tonight, leave me a comment. 1 sentence, 1 word, whatever you have. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I genuinely love knowing where these stories find people. And if you know someone who is carrying this kind of silence right now, send this to them without any explanation. Just send it. They'll know why. Hit subscribe so the next story finds you when you need it. I'll be here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Nashville, Tennessee, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.